In schools today, like Northview High School, located in Duluth, Georgia, there are tens to hundreds to thousands of books available for student use, and some of these end up being taught in actual curriculum. But it's only a select few that make it through the qualification process. Factors like alignment with curriculum, relevance and appropriateness, literary quality, inclusivity, all affect whether a book ends up in the classroom or not. And one of these books is To Kill a Mockingbird, authored by Harper Lee.
In recent years, this book has become under fire for a multitude of reasons. Attempts to ban the book in schools are gaining traction, and a lot of teachers have begun to speak out against teaching it.
But before we delve into that, what is this book even about? And why is there so much controversy about it in the first place? Well, the story follows the characters Jean Louise Finch, also known by Scout, which is her nickname, Atticus Finch, who is her father and also the lawyer, and her Scout's older brother, Jeremy Finch. And they are a relatively well-off family in the southern Alabama town of Macomb. However, this being the 1930s meant that many segregation laws, such as Jim Crow laws, along with more informal forms of segregation, such as lynching, were common. Atticus works as a lawyer in the small town of Macomb, Alabama, and is soon put in the difficult position of defending a black man, Tom Robinson, against a charge of rape. Atticus indirectly argues that the reason the plaintiff, a white girl named Mayella Ewell, was injured was not because of the accused, but rather because her own father, Robert Bob Ewell, beat and perhaps even molested her. He argues that the injuries the girl received clearly came from someone who leads with the left, which Bob Ewell does, and Tom Robinson obviously does not, since his left hand was severely mangled when he was younger. However, the case, no matter how clear it seemed to us or to Scout, eventually boiled down to the word of a white man against the word of a black's. And Tom Robinson was found guilty. He is sentenced to death by an all-white jury and later dies trying to escape prison.
The book is extremely popular and well known. Although no final number of schools offering To Kill a Mockingbird across the U.S. exists, it is many, and it can be assumed the schools that offer it do because of its significance that saturates every corner of the book.
The theme of coming of age and the loss of innocence as you grow up. Dill, a side character friendly to Scout, ends up crying when he sees firsthand the injustices committed against Tom Robinson in the court case. He leaves the court and with Scout meets old Dolphus Raymond, a white man who voluntarily lives among the black community in Macomb. He explains that, quote, things haven't caught up to Dill's instincts yet, and that when he is older, things might strike him as not right, but he won't cry over the meaningless hate people spout towards each other without even thinking, especially of whites towards blacks. And that leads into the second theme, possibly even more prominent than the first, the theme of mindless racism and class disparity. The Ewells are the town scum. They literally live in a dump. Their father is unemployed, lazy, constantly drunk, and abusive. They are poor. Very few feel the need for education, and sanitation is an afterthought. In their court proceedings, both Bob and Mayella Ewell are characterized as abrasive, uncouth, and needlessly bellicose. On the other hand, Tom Robinson is polite, as refined with his speech as he could be, and he's characterized as humble, hardworking, and sympathetic. And despite this, all of the evidence pointing to Robinson not being guilty of rape, he was sentenced to death. No matter how low life the Ewells may be, how disgusting they may conduct themselves, they would always be on a higher standing than anyone of the black community because, quote, if scrubbed with eye soap in very hot water, their skin was white. The vulgar language and the mature content found in the book are tools to present this theme in the book. A third theme is the idea of being ostracized for being different from others. Scout does not want to be a girl, likely from the all-male influence on her childhood. For this, she is continually pressured into it by her aunt Alexandria. Boo Radley, a phantasmic character who turns out to be a recluse, is mystified and turned into a monster by their community. And it takes Scout the entire book to realize that he wanted to stay in his house, a concept unnatural to her. Dolphus Raymond, a white man who lives among the black community, a concept unimaginable by their white community, has to pretend to be drunk all the time to give said white community a reason to latch onto excuse his behavior. unnecessary prejudice against people who do things differently. And the fourth theme is the essence of courage. Atticus makes it a point to teach Jem that, contrary to what he thinks, courage is not, quote, not a man with a gun in his hand, but rather when you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway. Such is the case when Miss DeBose, the crabby neighbor geriatric, battles her morphine addiction despite already being on her deathbed. Such is the case when Atticus fights for Robinson despite him being a dead man. Quote, the minute Maella Ewell opened her mouth and screamed.
These themes can have a long-lasting impact on many people in a positive way. This New York Times article produces accounts on how many people were inspired by the book. Some people find a role model in Atticus Finch, who fights against injustice despite it being certain he would lose. Some people glean something from the depictions of prejudice and class disparity. Some people find meaning in the definition of courage furthered by the book. However, there are people who feel negatively impacted by the content in To Kill a Mockingbird. In an account from the New York Post, one black student from Washington felt uncomfortable due to the use of the N-word, compounded by the fact that they were the only black student in the class. There's also the problem with misinterpretation. Many young readers misinterpret what the book is trying to do and may not look at the overall themes that are present in the story. The book has been banned at a high school in Washington state for lacking a black perspective and being outdated to their curriculum. But still, one teacher uses To Kill a Mockingbird in her district. She believes the book should stay in the curriculum, and the most important aspect is to teach it in a trusting environment that generates open discussion about the book and what it means to each student. Banning the book also isn't a one-sided argument anymore. Both sides of the political spectrum want to ban the book for different reasons. The right argues it portrays all white people as racists, while the left argues that the use of the N-word is excessive, and that Atticus is being represented as a white savior.
Understanding all of this about the novel, the fractious issues, the plot, and the main themes and messages Lee meant to convey, what is the verdict? What is the decision of this trial? The trial on whether or not To Kill a Mockingbird should be taught in schools? A resounding absolutely. The argument that the book is outdated confused us. It is reasonable to note that the book is quite old, being written in the 1960s, but it is as equally as important to note that the content that the book is reflecting on is set in the 1930s. It is also a work of fiction. Lee created a story to provide a simple, understandable illustration of the past, and it still holds up today. The fact that it bothers people should tell you how well it achieves this goal. The gratuitous use of the N-word is shocking the most, but without it, the book wouldn't be genuine. It also gives teachers the opportunity to introduce topics of racism, prejudice, without watering it down. While it is true that the black perspective is of utmost importance when talking about racism, that doesn't mean that other perspectives necessarily have to be ignored. Naturally, focusing on the white perspective gives us insight into why white people thought the way they did, or at least shows us how deeply ingrained racism was in white society at the time, and how easily most people just accepted the state of things. Knowing this, it allows us to halt further discriminatory mindsets. To Kill a Mockingbird absolutely prioritizes the white perspective and sidelines the black one. This is a valid criticism, but that doesn't mean all value of the book is immediately lost. The setting of this book is 1930s Southern Alabama. In this time period, and especially in the locale, Jim Crow laws were exceedingly common and racist racial views were accepted as the status quo. To deny the reality of the situation is to lie about history, and the book doesn't even paint all white people as racist. The main protagonist and several other characters, Atticus, Jem, and Scout, are all white, and certainly not racist. Now, the criticism that the problem of discrimination is painted very black and white, all racist whites are evil, all egalitarian whites are virtuous, is true. But this is a view model that is easy to introduce school children into and then later be expanded upon. The value of the book is not lost. Many critics say Atticus is a white savior, a kind of benevolent, virtuous white hero who swoops in from the heavens above to rescue the poor, ostracized black man. While he is almost quixotically morally pure, this is not the case. He is instead a representation of the reality of white saviorism in America. It is done in vain. The important point is that he does not end up saving Robinson. This is what Lee wanted to say, the idea that, despite all the efforts to prevent the inevitable outcome, the black man is persecuted because of the prevalent racism present in the U.S. then, not the idea that a virtuous white man needs to save the poor black man. Kill a Mockingbird is not a perfect book by any means. It primarily focuses on the white perspective despite the black perspective being equally, if not more important, in a discussion of racism in the history of the U.S. Its depiction of racism from the white side is pretty, pun not intended, black and white, with all the evil, distasteful whites being racist and all the virtuous, kind whites being egalitarian. But all these issues can be dispelled or even turned into constructive elements if, and this needs to be emphasized, it is taught right. If the book is just thrust into a young, unprepared classroom, the messages and themes Lee wants to convey will no doubt be lost or terribly misinterpreted. Perhaps students may interpret racism as an issue that's the job of solely white people to solve. Personally, I know the frequent use of the N-word gave it quite the notoriety in middle school, and many students desired to read the book just so that they could hear the teacher say it in class. This is not how the book should be taught. The book must be taught in an environment that invites open discussion as well as understanding of both the limits of Lee's writing as well as its depth. It needs to be taught without offense, but being uncomfortable is not to be avoided. Nothing can be learned if a topic is fully familiar with you. And if these prerequisites are met, this book becomes a well of good messages and themes beyond just the issue of black prejudice, but also becomes a perfectly suitable introduction or addendum to the topic of racism in U.S. history. There is nothing in this book, correctly taught, that necessitates a ban. To Kill a Mockingbird should be taught in schools. It should be saved.